Hi, my name is Kerry Critchlow from RCR Recording Studios, and today we are going to be talking about phasers and flangers. Now, I know I said I was going to do separate videos on each of the components, choruses and all that, but in this case, I think it makes more sense to do phasers and flangers together because they're extremely similar effects. Now, I do need to preface all this with saying, when it comes to what's happening under the hood with these effects, I'm not a complete expert, and so I'm going to do my best to show you kind of how these things work, but there's more that's going into this than probably what I'm going to show you. So if you're very interested in the electronic side of things, then you may want to check out some more expert, get better expert advice than what I'm going to give you. But my whole goal with this series is not to give you the technical expertise, but to give you the creative expertise in order to create music, essentially. And so these are tools that you can use in your arsenal to create cool effects or give your productions some interesting movement and create some cool sounds and that kind of thing. So that's the approach we're going to be taking it. That being said, I'm going to do my best to sort of explain how these work to the best of my ability, but I might get a few things wrong. And so, don't take anything I'm about to give you as gospel. Check me on this. But anyways, we're going to get into it. Phasers and flangers. So what is a phaser? It's an audio phaser effect. An audio phaser effect is a modulation effect that alters the phase of an audio signal to create a sweeping or swooshing sound. It's often used to give natural sounds or a synthesized or electronic effect. And so we'll get into that first, and then we'll come back to flangers. So before we get super into phasers, we ought to maybe understand something else first, and that is, what is phase? And so what we're going to do is we are going to bring up our old trusty piano here, just as a fun little example. Phasers, flangers, these can all be used on any kind of instrumentation. I'm just using piano because it's a simple example. So we'll bring up a piano, and we'll come up with a very quick, piano line here. Yeah, I was going to try something, but it's not coming out. I don't know, maybe. Bear with me. Sorry, I might be spending too much time on this. Well, it's probably not great. Sure, why not? Not great. I was going for something, but this will do for now. Anyways. And then we can just have that loop. So what we're going to do is set up a couple of audio tracks here. And you'll see where we're going with this. We're going to convert this MIDI into an audio waveform. And then we are going to copy it and paste it into these two tracks. And if we zoom in a little bit, we're going to see that these two pianos have some waveforms. And these are the waveforms. And as you can see, because they're exact duplicates of one another, that the or at least it should be. Okay, here we go. So if we look at the waveforms here, they're duplicates of each other. So if you can look at like this bottom line here and this bottom line here, as it goes, you can sort of see that it kind of has this little wave form here, and at the bottom here it's matching. And then if we look at the top one is also matching. And so these would be considered to be perfectly in phase. Now, what would happen if we were to flip this bottom one upside down? Well, it will turn out that these two will cancel out each other out and you will not hear anything. And so that's kind of what phase is when these two tracks, audio waves, are in perfect sync with one another, the peaks match and the valleys match. But if we were to invert them so that when this one peaks, this one's dipping, then the two waveforms will cancel each other out. It's like adding, a positive number and a negative number together, or like +1 and -1 together, you get 0. And so if we were to click our little phase button here, what that did was essentially flip this bottom one upside down. So now anytime that this is going up, this is now going down instead. And maybe we can even show that. Yeah. Okay. So as you can see with this phase turned on, when this is going up right here, if we look, we'll set our marker here, and you can see that from here it's going up, and then from here it's going down. Or if we set our marker here, on this bottom one, we got this going a little peak here, but on the top one, it's dipping. So they are exactly inverted from each other, and if we were to play these two together, you would hear nothing. And so nothing is happening. We're playing this, and because the two waveforms are inverted, you're not hearing anything because the two waveforms are canceling each other out. Now, we'll keep this out of phase, but now we're going to zoom in, and we are going to move this bottom track ever so slightly off so that now they're not aligned. Now they're just a little bit off with each other, barely anything at all, but you can see that they're not quite together anymore. And if we play it, now it sounds very thin and tinny. If we were to mute the bottom one, that's what it sounds like. But when we add in this new copy, now it's going to seem thin and kind of like sort of ghostly almost. And even if we were to put it back in phase, it's now it's going to sound different because the two phases are more aligned than they were. What's happening is that because these two waveforms are they're kind of being added together, just making the volume higher, but they're not quite completely in sync, but they're more in phase now. When we click this, we are inverting it, remember. And so if we make a little more of a move, so it's creating different effects depending on how much we move this bottom track out of sync with the top track. Now, you may remember we did this kind of thing with our chorus effect, and chorus, flanger, and phaser are all very similar in that kind of regard. They all play with the timing or pitch or frequency or various things, so that they can be kind of similar effects in a way. But this is how phase works, is that we're moving things out of time. We're delaying one of these tracks with the original track. So if we call this the original, and then maybe we'll call this one the delay track. We are delaying this track by X amount of time, and we've got it flipped out of phase, so it's inverted, and it's giving us different kind of effects depending on how we have it. And the closer together they are, the more kind of thin it begins to sound. All right. And then if we put it back into phase, now this is kind of more like a chorus effect now that it's back sort of in phase with each other. Now it's just a short delay. But you're still getting some phase stuff happening. Depending on what's going on with the track. And so phase is essentially just kind of playing with the waves when you add them together, because they're not completely aligned. Sometimes certain frequencies are going to poke out, and sometimes they're going to be covered up and muffled and things like that, and you're just going to get all kinds of interesting effects. Depending on where you put them. All right. And so that's kind of how phase works. Now, what a phaser does is, if we put this back all the way aligned. Okay. Now, one way to kind of achieve, well, first of all, I'll play you a phaser effect so you kind of hear what's going on. So we'll bring up a phaser plugin. Here we go. And we'll just play this. Now, we'll just play it, and then we'll kind of go through what's going on here with these settings. And so all we're hearing is this track here, the original. All right. And so it's giving that out of phase kind of sound as we listen to it, right? And then you can play with different things. So like we have kind of what's going on under the hood, and this is not exact, but I'll do my best to show you, is that there's some EQ stuff happening, or at least I believe so. And the way they do this is they create all-pass filters. We're not going to do that. This is sort of an approximation of the effect, not an exact replica. So we're going to create some notches, some peaks, some poles, as you might say, okay? And we can put them on different frequencies. Right now I just have them on the default frequencies, but we can move these around to anywhere we want. And if we now were to play this track, I'm going to turn it down a little bit. And actually, I'm going to turn the other one down as well, because these are going to kind of add some volume to what's going on. So this is without it. And then with it. And then if we were to all right. And that's creating some filter sweeps, right? Well, if we were to do this on the bottom track instead and have both of these playing together, what's going to happen as I sweep these frequencies notches back and forth is that the frequencies are going to interfere with the top one. And then we can move the frequencies closer together. Exact numbers are not important, but like you can kind of see what's going on here. And then if we were to turn this off, it's muted. We have the phase inverted here. So all we're hearing is the effect. You can think of this as like our wet effect. Because the top, anything that's not in these frequencies is being canceled out, right? If we were to turn off our phase and do it, now we're going to get sort of a blend of the two effects. So like you can think of this bottom one now as our wet, and the top one is our dry. All right. And so if we come back to our effect here, these are emulating, this EQ was emulating sort of all pass filters. I just used notch filters, but in reality, it would be getting rid of anything that's not these. If we like look at our, well, here, let's default back real quick. And if we remember previous videos, we have our high pass, which lets all the highs pass through and cuts out the lows. And then we have our low pass, which lets all the lows pass through and cuts out our highs. An all pass filter might look something along the lines of this. And then you can have like more of like a notchy sort of thing. So that might be like what an all-pass filter is. Meaning the only thing that is coming through now on this EQ is this frequency here, and it's being emphasized a little bit. Let's turn on our EQ. All right. And so it's cutting out all the frequencies that's not in this little area. If we were to go back to our example here where we use notch filters, like I said, this is not a one-to-one. This is not exactly what's happening with the phaser, but you can sort of get the idea when you play these two together. And turn on the EQ. You're hearing some phasing happening in the waveforms. Well, this plugin is doing that automatically for you. So you have the amount of those peaks. Now, with most phaser plugins, the frequencies are fixed, meaning you can't choose where each of these individual frequencies are. They're just sort of fixed with with the plugin, and they've determined what frequencies work best for these plugins, where those are, so you can't move them around like you can here. But this lets you select how many you're using. You have 4, 6, 8, 12. The rate is how fast these are being oscillated or moved back and forth using an LFO, a low frequency oscillator. And you can choose whether you want a sine wave, a triangle, a square, a saw. We've seen all this before. If you've looked at the oscillator and LFO video that we did a couple weeks back, you should have a good understanding of LFOs. But essentially what is happening is that this plugin is using a low frequency oscillator to determine, as it goes, it's moving these pass filters kind of back and forth in a sweeping manner, which is giving our phaser its movement, right? The resonance is, you can think of it as how sharp the peaks are, or how loud these resonant peaks are with the filter. So you can think of it as it's almost like a volume control for these poles. All right. Hopefully that gives you some indication. But the resonance, the louder these are, the more resonant the sound is going to become. And the quieter these are, the less resonant it's going to be. The more subtle the effect is going to be, in essence, right? And so that's what this resonant thing is doing, is it's sort of like giving volume to those peaks, making them sharper, that kind of thing. Width is how, just how wide the effect is. It can be kind of more mono-y or stereo-y. The rate is how fast those are going back and forth, and the depth is how much of the effect you're hearing. All right, so you can hear a similar effect when we turn off this chorus and we turn on our EQ here, and it's blending the two signals together. This bottom one is throwing the top one out of phase a little bit because we're emphasizing certain frequencies here. And so you can create a phaser effect, in essence, by duplicating your track, putting an EQ, using these notch filters here, and then, automating this movement back and forth. Or the LFO, low frequency oscillator, will do that movement automatically for you. And so you can get some interesting effects with this. And that's kind of how a phaser is working in a nutshell. It's using the pass filters. Like, this is not an exact, like I said, not an exact one-to-one. These are notch filters. They're doing a similar thing, but with a true phaser, you're actually getting rid of everything that's not included in these peaks, right? And you can I guess one way to emulate it would be to do this. Yeah, and so you can have some fun with it, and it's just giving some movement to the track as it's doing this. All right. Like I said, it's not a one-to-one. You can sort of approximate the effect using this EQ, but there's some different stuff happening on the hood. But that's kind of an example of what a phaser is doing. Is it's just sort of sweeping EQs to move the things out of phase as it goes, and then you can kind of choose how fast you want it to happen, and some various controls from that respect. That's a phaser in a nutshell. It's just sort of giving you that sweepy effect as it goes. You can get pretty, extreme with it too. Or you can be more subtle with it. All right. But it's just adding a little bit of movement to the sound and creating sort of those sweepy sounds. Now, a flanger is doing a very similar thing, except instead of utilizing frequencies with like EQ, it's doing it with a delay line. And so if we were to go back into these tracks, now we touched on this a little bit with chorus and the one effect where it moved this track kind of back and forth a little bit. Now, there's no way to automate this delay line. Well, maybe, I guess, using a delay. So let's bring up our delay here. And this is a stock delay here. Feedback is fine. And we're going to want to do manual. And it's going to be in very small increments, usually between 0.1 milliseconds and like maybe 5 to 10 milliseconds-ish as we go. But it's essentially just automating this. So as we play the track, so you kind of hear it a little bit. This bottom track is just being delayed, and you're hearing a little bit of that dirt happening. Just the nature of the beast. That's just the delay plugin acting up, but the minus the dirt, that's the effect you can see. So we're taking this copied track, this duplicate track, and we're just delaying it a little bit, between this, 0.1 milliseconds and 5 milliseconds-ish, roughly. I mean, those are, you can play with it a little bit, go a little higher if you want, but the higher you go, the less it starts to sound like a flanger, and the more it might start sounding like a chorusy effect. minus the pitch shifting aspects of it. And so if we were to bring up a flanger effect, like this meta flanger from Waves, it's using an LFO to move this delay time, back and forth a little bit so that that's not stagnant. And it's just moving these two tracks out of phase. Like, again, essentially what's happening is that an LFO is controlling this type of movement. The track kind of being delayed back and forth like this, all right, against this track as they're both being played together. And that's creating some phase shifts. And so phase and flanger are very similar. They can kind of sound alike in some ways too. You still kind of get that sweepy sort of sound with the flanger as well as you're, playing this back. We were using a delay to do that for us here because our DAW can't play this as it's moving. But if you delay this and move this delay back and forth, it's the same effect as doing this with our bottom track, okay? And that's how a flanger is working. And it's creating this sweeping effect as it goes because the phase relationship between the top track and the bottom track are changing over time as the phase goes back and forth. And that means it's canceling out certain frequencies and emphasizing other frequencies based on the relationship between the two waves, right? And we talked about that not long ago with this phase switch button, inverting it. And you heard how they would cancel out the sound and make it thin. And then as we moved it in various spots, the relationship between the two waveforms would change. And that's what's creating these things, these effects. Now, you don't have to know all of that necessarily to be able to use these effects. It's more important that you know kind of what they're doing. But I think understanding a little bit about what's going on under the hood can kind of help you to a degree. But flangers and phasers can sound similar because they're doing kind of similar things. One's moving the track back and forth. One's kind of more playing with the frequency a little bit, if you will. And then and flangers and choruses are similar as well. You can just say that flangers are kind of smaller delay times than choruses, generally speaking. Yeah, and so if we play our flanger again, and if we increase our rate here to a pretty high rate, maybe, then we can create some stereo effects as well here with this stereo knob. And spread it. We can choose the waveform. This particular plugin, you only choose between a sine or a triangle, but it's just moving the delay time along this axis here, and we can. And then we can add feedback in, which is just introducing the output back into the input. And so it creates a loop and can create some wonky effects here. Got a little bit of an EQ here, a filter, just allowing us to high pass or low pass at whatever frequency we choose. The depth is how much of the effect you're kind of hearing. And then this is the modulation rate, or an indicator of what is happening with the rate. So the faster it is, the faster that goes. And it's making this piano sound almost like it's not a piano anymore, giving kind of like a different sort of vibe altogether, right? And so phasers and flangers can have similar types of sounds. I think this color is just an EQ thing. The limiter is just to keep it from clipping, so it's just sort of a compressor. And you can be subtle with it and just add a little bit of movement to your sound, or you can use it to make it sound like something that it's not. These are also, like, flangers and phasers are used to make either organic sounds sound like they're inorganic, more electronic-y, or you can use them on synthesizers to give your synthesizers some movement and some vibe. But that's really what these plugins are doing. They're just adding vibe. And the same thing goes for chorus, which we touched on in a past video. They're all using modulation, LFOs, movement over time in order to create these effects. And they're all kind of similar in a lot of regards. You can almost make a flanger sound kind of like a chorus if you move the delay high enough. Right. And so they're all related with each other, and you can use one for, different things or different things. I mean, it's hard to explain, because I think we mentioned this in a previous video, but they can all kind of sound similar to each other in a little way, but under the hood, they're kind of doing some different things from each other, or at least different amounts. And playing with different aspects, but they're all just adding some movement to the track and allowing you to create some fun little things. And you can do this in subtle amounts. You can do it, excuse me, got something in my throat there. Subtle amounts or extreme amounts or anything in between. But they're just used to add some, movement. You can also use these on some percussive elements. So like if we were to, for instance, add in a drum kit here, and we'll just come up with a very simple groove for today's purposes. Let's pick a drum kit, and why not? Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And we're going to go back to our eighth note groove for today. We did 16th last time, and I feel like I got my fill of it. 16th grooves can be great for different types of music, but for our purposes, we'll just do, well, you know what? Why don't we just do a quarter note? We haven't done one of those yet, I don't think, so we'll just keep it varied for you guys. And then we're just going to turn down every other hi-hat, which gives just a little bit more natural feeling to the drums. We're also going to throw a limiter on the drums, and this is mostly just to get a bit more volume out of them, because this sample pack tends to be a little bit quieter. And that'll be fine. All right. And then we'll just make these eighth notes for simplicity's sake, or aesthetic sake. I can talk. Just make it a little easier to see. But we still like these are quarter note hi-hats then. And then we've got a nice little kick and snare pattern here. Snares on 2 and 4. And we'll copy paste it, loop it. And then let's see what these phasers and flangers sound like on the drums. So we'll start with the phaser. All right, so you can have some fun with that. Just adding a little bit of some character, some movement to the drums. Now you can use that this effect as a way to change the tonal characteristics of the drum in subtler or extreme ways, or however you want to go about doing it. To add some movement to them, just to keep, you can add it for like just a section in the drums. You don't have to have it all the whole way through your song if you want. You can pick just a small little section and add one of these effects just to give a little bit of interest to that section, and then go back to your normal sounding drums. But here's what a flanger would sound like. Yep. But we've got our flanger set up more like a chorus effect right now, so that's why it sounds a little bit a little loosey-goosey like we did in our chorus example. But here's more of a phasery sort of a vibe. Yeah. And so you can play with the different parameters and give different kind of some movement to your drums as they're going. And like I said, you can have this going on the whole time, or you can just choose a small little section that you want to add this to. And it just gives the drums a little bit of movement, that kind of like swooshy sound as it goes. Just like in our chorus example, if you wanted to make this more chorusy, you can, just increase the delay time. And it gives it kind of a more of a loosey-goosey sort of sound, like there's more than one thing playing at the same time, which is what the chorus effect does. All right, and so that's what flangers and phasers are going to do. Maybe one more example we can use here before we get out of here would be like a bass. We don't often use basses as examples here, but these can be a fun effect to put on a bass as well. And we'll just use, whatever. And so we'll listen to a chorus effect on a bass. Get a little rhythm, a little extra rhythmic aspect to the bass, or you can just kind of give it a little bit of vibe. You can go subtle or extreme with it, and same thing would be the case for the flanger. Yeah. And so you can hear the bass, and it's a little more pronounced with this flanger, but you can hear the bass sort of get thin as the flanger is hitting certain, certain spots on this, LFO, and because the interference pattern, the phase interference happening, is canceling out some of the lower frequencies of the bass, which is making it sound a little thinner, a little brighter, and that low end goes away a little bit. And so you want to be careful when you're using these types of plugins on the bass or anything that has you want to keep intact low end information on. It can be a cool effect, but if you're not careful, it can get rid of your low end altogether. Now, if that's not something you're worried about, then don't worry about it. But it's just something to keep in mind, that because of the phase relationships that happen with phasers, flangers, and choruses, what can happen is it can get rid of some of the low end information at times if you're not careful with it. So just something to be aware of. But I'm hoping that you have a better understanding of phasers, flangers. Last week we covered choruses in some detail. This week we went over some phasers and flangers in detail, and you can kind of see how they're all related, how they're all using LFOs to create movement over time based on various parameters. Phasers are kind of doing it based on frequencies. Phasers or flangers are doing it based on delay line, and choruses are kind of doing it more based on pitch, but also some time bass there, some delay bass there as well. And so they're all sort of functioning in similar ways. They're all kind of using waveforms to sort of cancel each other out and then come back in and reinforce each other and various things. You're using all of these different aspects to kind of create this movement over time using the LFOs to control the parameters of that movement. And depending on what parameters you're using are kind of what the things are going to be. So you can create these effects without plugins. Plugins make it a lot easier, and you get a lot more control in a lot of cases over what the parameters are, and it makes it easier to add in the LFOs as opposed to manually writing it in. We saw that with chorus, and even if we were doing like volume stuff with it as well, like it's easier to use an LFO to make your volume go up and down than to write in automation of like that, an LFO automation. Well, some DAWs will allow you to do that pretty easily, but anyways, plugins can be very helpful, but you do not need them to create these effects. And you can get some very interesting effects that you would never find in a plugin by doing these kind of things on your own if you wanted to. So the options do remain there for you to kind of manually make these effects happen. But plugins can simplify that process to a large degree and give you some interesting options on their own as well. And so it makes certain things a little bit easier to play with or to automate. But anyways, I hope you have a better understanding of phasers and flangers. You understand how LFOs are used to control the movement in them. If you have any questions on any of this, I would recommend going back and watching my oscillator and LFO video, my chorus video, or just checking out a lot of the great YouTube videos by other creators that are out there that touch on the subject. But my purpose in all of this is to get you ready for what's to come next, and that is sound design. We are going to be using all of the concepts we've been covering over the last month or two to get into how you can create your own sounds to use in your own productions, and hopefully will give you the ability to kind of be creative in how you go about doing that, and give you the tools in order to create the sounds that you want to put in your productions. And you can use these effects. These effects can be used. They're often used in sound design. They can also be used in mixing. They can also be used just to add some vibe to your to the sounds. So you don't have to use sound design necessarily. You can use these tools on their own independently, but they are definitely going to come into play when we get into sound design, which is going to be exciting. And I'm looking forward to getting into all of that in future videos. With that, I hope you guys have a great day, a great week, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.